Will you pray with me? Oh God, as we continue now in this season of Lent, I pray that you will empty me, that you will empty us, and allow your words to reside in this place. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So this morning we continue our theme of gifts of the dark wood, which represents for us maybe those scary places in our lives or those very dark times in our lives that we've experienced. And as we talked about last week, the dark wood is not normally something that we willingly walk into, but it's usually a place we just wake up one day and we find ourselves there. Maybe it's the dark wood of uncertainty, or the dark wood of being lost, or the dark wood of emptiness. So this morning, if you ever have been, or if you find yourself in a dark wood experience in your life, know that even though that is a very painful experience, you are also in the best position possible to hear enlightenment and be awakened in some way by God with insight. So ultimately, the dark wood does offer to us many gifts. And this morning, we are talking about the gift of emptiness. And if you think about that gift of emptiness, it really positions us most intimately with Jesus. We heard this morning from the book of Philippians that Paul writes that Jesus, though in the form of God, emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant. And Jesus being found humble in human form, even to the point of death on a cross. That word humble comes from the Latin word, meaning Latin word, root word, humus, or meaning earth. Jesus became empty in order to take on the humility of our own earthly experience, which I think is why we love Jesus so much. Because we know to our very depths that Jesus understands emptiness. The emptiness that just comes with walking on this earth. And when I look throughout the Gospels, I realize, Jesus really encountered people over and over again who were experiencing emptiness. Those are the people that it seems Jesus was actually drawn to. Let's take, for example, Jesus' very first miracle. His mother Mary confronts him and comes to Jesus and tells him there are some empty stone jars at this wedding feast. The bride and groom had invited their guests for this very long affair, and hospitality was a very sacred duty. And it was very serious to run out of wine. It would have been a terrible embarrassment to them. And so in this story, what I see is the emptiness of failure. And probably even more so, the emptiness of not living up to other people's expectations. Maybe all of your life you have felt this type of emptiness. Not living up to others' expectations, and maybe even more, not living up to your own expectations. Later in his ministry, Jesus encountered empty stomachs. He looked out over a multitude that had just refused to go home after a very long, hot day. And the Gospels tell us that Jesus was moved to his depths because he saw people not only with empty stomachs, but he realized they had empty hearts. They had lost hope in their political situation. They had lost hope in the answers of their religious leaders. And they needed a new message. Maybe you are experiencing that type of emptiness this morning. The emptiness of despair. of broken hopes, feeling a lack of purpose and meaning in today's life. At a well in Samaria, Jesus was drawn to an empty bucket because on the other end of that bucket was an empty woman. She had had a string of empty relationships. This is the woman who had had 5 husbands, and she was not married to the man with whom she was currently living. And we don't know her story. We don't know if they had all died, all of her previous husbands. We don't know if they had abandoned her. And I ask again, why was she at that well in the heat of the day alone, when the custom was for women to come together there in the morning? Was her life also empty of friendship? This morning, maybe you are experiencing the emptiness of relationships in your life. Jesus was also drawn to an empty purse. In the temple, he watched as people came forward and they brought their offerings. And it was this poor widow who Jesus noticed. She emptied her purse. She gave everything she had. 2 small copper coins, worth only about a penny, and now she had nothing left. She experienced the emptiness of basic life provisions to exist. Another woman with a blood hemorrhage for 12 years. She had spent everything on doctors who could not help her. And she experienced, my guess is, 100 empty answers that go along with a major health challenge. And finally, Jesus was drawn to empty fishing nets. Simon Peter and his companions, they had been fishing all night long. And there Jesus found them crouched on the shoreline, washing these empty nets. They may have experienced the frustration of an empty career that consumed them. A career that they worked so hard at, but still left them coming up with nothing. And my guess is in this room this morning, we know all of these conditions, all of these types of emptiness. We know what emptiness feels like. We know what it's like to be down and out, whether that be emotional or physical or financial. And when I look at all the dark wood experiences we are exploring this season, for myself, I find emptiness to be one of the most devastating and one of the most challenging. Yet Jesus was drawn to these empty people. And so Jesus also sees our emptiness. And the miracle is that Jesus chooses to be in relationship with empty people, even if that is us. Eric Elnes says that the connection between emptiness, God, and humanity is profound. Emptiness, he said, is knit within the very structure of the human body itself. For example, in the hand we heard about this morning, that our hand has more empty space than it has matter. So in some ways, said Elnes, emptiness proves to be one of the most safest and most beautiful spots in the world to stand. Because that's where God is, in the emptiness. I love our gospel reading this morning that Maggie read about this woman that we learn about, who seemed to have discovered something very precious. I think that she had discovered the secret value of emptiness. So we have this setting of this house. And I can imagine all the smells in that house. They were having a dinner party. There was bread baking, fresh bread. There was meat roasting. There was butter and honey, the ripest of grapes, the best fruit. And then the gospel says this new fragrance entered the room. A sweet-smelling aroma. And I think that smell was so fine. I bet none of those disciples had ever smelled that before. I imagine that Jesus never smelled that fine perfume before. But not only has Mary unsealed this jar, she has poured what is equal to 1 year's worth of wages onto the feet of Jesus and is drying his feet with her hair. And they said, well, Judas was the one that actually was blamed for this, but I bet you they were all thinking this. It's not right to empty something so valuable. But I believe that in emptying that perfume bottle, Mary is doing something even more valuable. Mary is teaching us the value of emptying out our very souls in order to connect with Jesus. And unlike the other people in that room, Jesus was not bothered by this emptying. He was not afraid of this giving of a well-to-do woman, because he knows that she also has experienced deep emptiness. If you recall, the gospel said that there had once been an empty chair at that dinner table. It was her brother Lazarus. He had been dead and in the tomb for 4 days until Jesus came and raised him to life. And so Mary, knowing that emptiness and that empty chair at that table, she doesn't hesitate. She empties out that costly, rare, prized perfume because she has learned one of the most difficult lessons in life. That her brother was dead and raised to life. And so that Mary knows that when we are empty, when we are really rock bottom, down and out empty, Jesus can and will fill us up. Emptiness actually says that the gift of emptiness is the happiest gifts of all. Now that really sounds like a stretch to me, because I don't know about you, but when I feel empty, I am not happy. But maybe we need to rethink this. When you look at all those empty people that Jesus encountered in the Gospels, maybe illness is hitting on a real deep truth. Think about those wedding hosts with those empty wine jars. Jesus filled them up, and that wine was better than the first. Like the multitudes with their empty stomachs, Jesus filled them to capacity, and there was actually food left over. Like the woman with the empty purse, Jesus blessed her for all eternity. And now today, she is actually a model for us of generosity. We quote her during our stewardship campaigns. We quote this story, how she gave so much. Like the woman at the well with her empty bucket. She left that day with Jesus telling her she was going to be filled with living water. And the hemorrhaging woman, Jesus said, "It is your faith, your strong faith has made you whole." And finally, those fishermen with empty fishing nets. Jesus called them forth. And Jesus said, now you have a new divine calling. You are going to fish for people instead. Being empty is one of our deep lessons of Lent. In Lent, we are encouraged to be empty, aren't we? We talk about giving things up. We talk about pouring out ourselves. We try to really work on pouring out our pride, our grief, our best ideas, our expectations. And in Lent, we are to be empty vessels so that we can be in God's work in the world. There's a story I heard once about a Native American Sioux Indian, and his name was Frank Foolscrow. And he was a healer, and he would speak very intentionally about his process of becoming empty before he was called to heal someone. And he said that he would go through this personal ritual with himself, and he would imagine in his mind, he said, I saw myself as a hollow bone that is all shiny on the inside and empty. And I would look around on the inside of myself and I would see, are there any obstacles? Are there any junk there that is left? Things like pride or resentments or expectations. And then he said, when I was totally cleaned out, I knew that I was then ready to heal, and I was ready to serve the Great Spirit. And he said, I would lift up my hands, I would offer thanksgiving to God, and I could feel the power coming to me. Jesus lived his life like that, a hollow, empty bone. And at the cross, we hear the emptiest words I think we can ever even imagine. On the cries of the lips of Jesus, my God, why have you forsaken me? But it was within this deep emptiness that God found Jesus. Maybe this morning, you are a hollow, empty bone. And you might be there because of a dark wood experience. And if you are, be assured that this morning you are in a position for that great Spirit to come and fill you up. On the other hand, maybe this morning you are feeling very full. And you're full of all the stuff and junk that Foolscrow talked about. And if that's where you are, then let us learn from Mary. Empty out your soul and let God find you and fill you up with more than you could ever imagine.